When building a new website powered by a CMS, the content modeling part of the project is one of the most critical parts within that process. You have to get it right. Now, get the content modeling process wrong, and the CMS will be frustrating for content editors to use, as well as the code base will take significantly longer to maintain and support. Now, in case you're not aware, the content modeling process is the bit where you take the new website's designs or wireframes and then convert those designs into models within the CMS that allow the content editors to create and update content within the website or app. Now, Contentful CMS is a headless CMS, and this means that the content modeling process is slightly different compared to content modeling within a traditional CMS. So what I'm going to do in this video is give you a mini masterclass based on real-world learnings on how to start content modeling within Contentful. The tips in this video can save you hundreds of hours of rework, so I'm hoping you find it useful. Now, if you haven't come across my channel before, then my name is John and I release a video every single Sunday that's aimed to make you a better developer. So if you're into web development, JavaScript, CMS, then hit subscribe because I'm guaranteed you'll learn something. I should also point out I have written a book all about Contentful CMS development, so if you want to check that out, the link is below. Now, one of the first things you need to consider when you start content modeling are the tools that you have at your disposal. And by this, I mean what properties and fields exist within CMS that allow you to model data. Now, an important aspect of content modeling is understanding what fields and properties you can use to model data inside the CMS. So let's take a look at the default ones. Now, you can access this list by logging into Contentful and going to this Content Model tab. Now, from here, you can create a new content type. So I've already got one here. Let's click on it. Now, in order to add a field into my content type, I can click on this Add Field button. So let's go over this list. First, we have rich text. So rich text is exactly like a Microsoft Word text editor where we can have bold, font, underlines, all that good stuff. Next, we have a simple text string. Then we have a number. Then we have time and date. Next, we have location. So if you want to put a coordinate with a lat and long. Next, we have a media picker. So this means we can upload images, videos, PDFs, and any other type of file. We have a Boolean property, yes or no. And then we have two sly ones. So we have the JSON object property, and this one's really handy for customizing CMS. And finally, we have the reference field. So this field is really useful because it allows you to link two items together. So let's say that you want to create a menu, or let's say you want to create a breadcrumb, or maybe you wanted to create a component area on a page where a content editor can drag in different components. This is where you'd use the reference field. Now, if you're new to CMS, then this list might seem adequate. However, if you come from a traditional CMS background, this list might look very tiny indeed. Now, just to quickly prove this point, I'm now inside Umbraco CMS in their equivalent content model builder. Now, once I click on this Add Property button, you can see that I can select an editor. Now, from here, you can see that I've got a plethora of things. There's about 40 things. So we've got color pickers, content pickers, email addresses, tags, sliders, OpenStreetMaps, user pickers, members pickers, block lists, list views, radio buttons, image croppers, file uploads. And this is what I mean. On first glance, Contentful might seem like it doesn't really offer you that much. However, it has a secret up its sleeve within the JSON field. Now, when you're modeling in the real world, often the content models you need to generate can be very complex, and you might be worried that Contentful simply isn't powerful enough. Now, this is where the JSON field comes to the rescue. Now, within a Contentful, it's possible to create something called a custom app. The app framework will allow you to customize the Contentful UI however you need to. So with this, it's possible to create your own custom fields. So this custom field might be a single property, it might contain a bunch of properties thrown together, you can have a text box, a slider, you can build anything. Now, I'm not going to do a complete deep dive in how to create a custom app within this video. However, I will run you through the process just so you can get an understanding, a little bit of a flavor of what you can actually model. In order to create a custom app, we can use the Create Contentful app. Now, we can install this using the Create Contentful app, and then basically just do npx create contentful app and then give your project a name. Running that Create Contentful app locally is going to generate you a project that looks like this. Now, there are a few important things that we should point out. Now, within our package.json, we can see that we have a number of scripts. So basically, we can test and debug our applications. Now, this upload one is key, and I'll show you where we use that later on. Now, the other important thing around this is that you can see in the dependencies list. Now, running create Contentful app will install the F36 components, and this is basically a style library created by Contentful. Now, if we go over to the former 36 or the F36 Contentful website, you can see that we've got this build and extend Contentful products. Now, this is basically a design library which has a number of components. So clicking on this, you can see that we have things like accordions, assets, badges. We've got things like a card components. We've got dates. We've got sliders, form components, layout components, notifications, pills, typography, workbenches, utils, integrations. So as you can see, there's a load of stuff in here. Now, the nice thing about this is that, say for we want to implement a pop-up, all we need to do is come in here. You can see that we can import it. We've got some code examples, so we can just copy and paste some stuff, and off we go. Now, in order to make use of that code and that application in Contentful, we need to register it. And we can do this from the apps settings. So to access this menu, we need to go to the burger menu at the top, then go to organization settings. Now, from here, all we need to do is basically click on the apps menu item at the top. And then from here, we can create a new app. Now, I've created one already. So as you can see, when we click on it, we can add in some metadata, we can upload icons, give it some locations where it can appear in the editor, all that kind of good stuff. But the important one is this bundles tab right here. Now, if we click on this, you can see that we've got an upload area. So we can upload the output of our app folder here. And in order to generate the files within our application, you can see here that we need to run an npm run upload. And all we need to do is copy the files into here. Job is a good one. Custom app created. Now, assuming you set everything up right, when we go to our custom JSON object, if we go to settings, then we go to appearance, you can see that we can now pick our custom app from this list. So you can now style that field any way you need to. So the overall takeaway I want you to get from this section is that out of the box, we have those 9 basic content types. However, using custom apps, you can basically model anything that you want. And basically the only limitation is your imagination. Now, the great thing that Contentful has that former 36 component library means that you can build these components pretty quickly without having to reinvent the wheel yourself. Now you understand the fundamentals of how to create models in Contentful, let's think about the harder part, how to actually take your designs and then convert them into the CMS objects. And the reason why this is so critical, because get this wrong and you can waste a bunch of time and money. So let's think about it. Let's say you design a brand new website and in it you create a page component. Now let's say we have 1,000 pages and it takes content editors about a week, 2 weeks to migrate all the content from the old website into the new one. Now let's say that you make a mistake and you realize you actually need to have 5 page components rather than 1, and then you redo everything. The content editors now will have to redo all that content again and spend another week or 2 basically rebuilding everything. Now on top of this, you also have development effort. Pretty much every single time that you make a tweak within CMS and change the models, you're going to have to change the code. And if you have to do this all the time, you pretty much can end up rewriting the majority of your code base if you make a massive flaw. That's the reason why getting this right in the first place is so important. Trust me, I've done this for 19 years. I really understand what happens when you get this wrong. Now, when it comes to the content modeling process, you have a few differentiators when it comes to Headless. So let's go back to Umbraco and see what content modeling looks like in a traditional website. We're now back inside of Umbraco CMS, and what you're seeing on the left-hand side here in the content area is very typical of what you'll find within any traditional CMS. Now, from here, if content editors want to create pages within this website, they basically come to this page tree, and under the home page, they're free to create different pages. Now, using a child-parent relationship, we can then create subpages, we then can have subpages, and they can have subpages. And editors can basically build up a whole website structure using this traditional tree-like structure. Let's now compare that process to how you create content in a headless CMS. Now, within Contentful itself, to create content or view existing content, we go to this content tab. Now straight away you can see that we don't have the page tree anymore. Instead we're presented with a complete list of all the content that's being created in CMS. Now this can be a very overwhelming list, so at the top we have a filter, so we can filter by the different content types. And in order to create a new bit of content, you can see that we've got this add entry button, then we can create content by the type that we're interested in. You've now seen a comparison between how a traditional CMS works and how a headless CMS works. And one big difference is that page tree. Now, depending on the type of project you're working on, a page tree can have pros or it can have cons. Now, if you're just creating a website and that's all you're building, then having a page tree is really useful. Now, the reason for this is when it comes to building the primary navigation, the menu, then having that page tree makes life much easier to build that navigation type structure. Now, if on the other hand, you're creating content and that content needs to be shared between a website, an app, maybe multiple websites on a server, via an API, whatever, then trying to force feed all your content into a page tree is not ideal. This is especially true if a single page needs to live in multiple places. And this is the reason why when it comes to headless content modeling, we need to think about things slightly different. And this is the reason why we have two new concepts. Now, I'm not really keen on a jargon, but this is Contentful jargon. So we have topics and we have assemblies. The first thing to clear up is that whenever I'm talking about a topic or assembly, I'm not talking about anything new within Contentful itself. In Contentful, you'll still be creating content models and entries, content, whatever you want to call it. However, the content you can create could be classified as either a topic or an assembly. The tagline to describe a topic is an item that you can create once and publish everywhere. In essence, a topic is the interesting content contained within your website or app. It's content that is free from any presentation concerns. Some examples of a topic can include a news item or a press release, a product or an event. So in essence, a topic should have three qualities. A topic should be individually authorable, so each topic should represent a single area. A topic should be reusable. A topic should not contain metadata related to presentational or hierarchy concerns. A topic should be able to appear in multiple places. Finally, a topic should be self-sufficient, meaning they are independent from anything else. Now, the benefit of using a topic as a way to think about how you structure your content models is that it will allow you reuse. Now, let's say traditionally you built a news area in your website. Now, within your page tree, you had a news area with news templates. The news template contained basically metadata about the page, like the robots no follow and the page's description. It also contained the underlining news content as well. So the title, the content. Now, in 5 years' time, you want to change the look of your site and its structure. In a traditional CMS, the usual answer is to start from scratch and rebuild everything, followed by a lengthy content migration process. Now, instead, if you had followed the concept of a topic, in this example, you'd have had two models, a page model and a news item model. Now, this time around, if you needed to redesign your site, you could leave your news item model alone, and all you need to do is redesign your news template. Jobs are good and off you go. Now, in a headless CMS, content is much more likely to be shared across multiple channels. And this is the reason why keeping topics in mind when you're going through that content modeling process is really important. You always need to strive to try and keep your content and your presentation separate. The other Contentful headless concept you should know about are assemblies. Now, assembly, again, is just a theoretical concept to think about how to model relationships within Contentful, rather than a logical construct that you need to build yourself. Now, in the previous example, the news template would be classified as an assembly. So, assemblies wrap topics in order to render content within your website, app, etc. Now, an assembly will contain presentational properties and will also reference other models. Remember, you can reference other models within the CMS using the reference field. So, when you're going through the content modeling process, keeping the concepts of topics and assemblies in mind is really important to make sure that you design your models so that content can be easily reused. Now, one of the trade-offs with creating reusable content is that you still need to model presentational stuff like menus, hierarchies, that kind of good stuff. So in the next section, we're going to go through some content modeling tips, and we're going to figure out how do we actually design a primary navigation now that we don't have the page tree in Contentful anymore. As you have now seen, there is no out-of-the-box capability within Contentful that you can use in order to model your website's hierarchy. Now, the downside of using a headless CMS that allows for reusable content is that designing navigation and hierarchy is more complex compared to designing stuff in a traditional CMS, which provides you with that page tree. Now, this means that within a headless CMS, you'll need to design how the hierarchy will work within your architecture yourself. Now, to model a menu, you have two basic options. Firstly, you can create a specific content model that content editors can use to create menus and navigation. Now, you could create this model and you could call it something original like menu. And how you model this item will be determined by how complex your menu is. Now, if you need to create a complex mega menu, you may need to create multiple content models. Alternatively, this could be a good use case to build a custom field using the app framework to build something custom to make it much easier for editors to build menus. And for reference, this is probably the approach that I prefer. Now, the alternative option is to build the navigation within your assemblies, content models, however you want to call it. Now, in this pattern, you would add a reference field within your page models. Now, when it comes to adding this reference, you have two options. Now, you can either define the relationship as either bottom up, alternatively, it could be top down. Now, when it comes to deciding how you want to model your menus and hierarchy within Contentful, one of the biggest factors of approaches that you take will be based on the complexity of your hierarchy. Now, just in terms of hierarchy, there are basically 4 different patterns, which are sequential, random, linear navigation, and hierarchical navigation. And depending on what type of navigation you need to model, will basically influence the best approach you should take. Now, in some instances, you might want to use a single pattern, or potentially in more complicated situations, you might want to use a few of the patterns combined. However, the main takeaway is that sadly, navigation is not as easy in Headless, and it will definitely take some consideration. My second content modeling tip is about reuse. Now, on the screen right now, you can see my website. Now, on my site, I have a few different types of pages. So I have a home page that contains a carousel, a blog page that contains content, and a contact us page that contains a form. Now, when content modeling, you might be tempted to create a brand new content model for each type of page within Contentful. Now, the issue you will encounter if you adhere to this rule is that your website will be a complete pain to maintain. Now, anytime a content editor wants to change the page layout or create a new type of page, it will basically require development effort. As soon as they up Contentful, you'll need to update your code. So designing your models without any flexibility is a recipe for disaster. Now, going back to my website example, instead of creating a homepage, a blog page, and a contact us model, instead, creating a single generic page would be much better. Now, on that page, I would add a reference field, and this field can then be used by editors to drag components, or if you prefer the term blocks, onto it. Now, to model my site, I would likely build a carousel block, a form block, and a content block, and each one of these would basically be its own content model. Now, using blocks components like this means that content editors can construct pages by adding blocks to the generic page. Now, obviously, the downside of this approach is that editors will perform a few more clicks when creating a new page. However, the benefits from this approach completely beats the negatives. So when you design your CMS, so content editors have more power over how a page is structured, this means less maintenance, less coding overall. As new change requests come in, editors will be able to build the pages themselves from the existing blocks without needing any dev help at all. So this way of modeling will basically help future-proof your CMS design, and in general, it will usually be the preferred route you should take. Now, the final bit of advice I want to give you in this video is around nesting depth. When we're creating navigation, or even when we're creating assemblies, we'll be using that reference field. And it's very easy to create an item that references another item, that references another item. Now, I've been doing CMS development for over 19 years, and I can tell you, If you design something that has a nesting depth of over 3, I've never had a single content editor ever say this is a great experience. Now, the reason for this is that when something is nested 3 levels deep, it makes it much harder for a content editor to edit and work with that content in the CMS, because they're constantly going to be jumped between different screens and it's going to create a confusing experience. So my advice is, when you're doing this, if you notice that you're getting deeply chained, you want to rethink your content modeling process and potentially introduce a new type of content model. Now we have got to that stage where I'm hoping you now know everything you need in order to start content modeling like an absolute champ in Contentful. Now, if you have found value from this video, don't forget to sub and hit like. And if you'd like to learn more about Contentful CMS in general, then I've created an ultimate API and SDK guide for Contentful, which you can find on the link in front of you. So click on that to learn more. Otherwise, buy the book if you want to become a complete Contentful master, and hit subscribe. So, hope you're having a great time wherever you are in the world, and until next Sunday, happy coding.